Hi everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Our topic today is on remote working do's and don'ts. We will hear our cybersecurity experts' perspective. Uh, Today's webinar is about how in the COVID-19 pandemic situation, now almost everyone from the IT industry is working from home remotely. And this has caused additional stress on the InfoSec teams of all organizations because the surface area of attacks has increased. It is also evident that cyber attacks have increased in number to exploit this change. So today we will be going through the most important aspects of what to take care of when working remotely. Let me introduce my speaker today. We have Shailendra, who's a core InfoSec professional involved in this domain since 2010. He has successfully led projects on ISO 27001, PCI DSS, SOC 2 standards, along with risk and vulnerability management programs. He also oversees regulatory compliance for EU GDPR, CCPA, and other data privacy laws. Shailendra has worked with several organizations and clients in implementing their information security program. He currently holds CISSP, CISM, CISA, and ISO 27001 lead auditor certifications. Welcome, Shailendra. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Janvi. Thank you for having me over.
Yes. So, Shailendra, let's start with your perspective on what are some of the best practices for cybersecurity while working remotely.
Okay. So see, there are two aspects to it. One aspect is what organizations are supposed to do, but today I really rather would focus on the things that can be taken care of by the individuals who are working remotely, because most of the things that I would rather prefer that people focus on are usually expected to be in their direct control. In case, let's say that direct control is not there, then they should quickly reach out to their IT administrators to get these enabled. One of the most important and high priority change that I would expect any individual working from home to do is to enable two-factor authentication on their accounts, specifically on accounts belonging to their organization. Second thing is that it is a general tendency to have a simple, easy to remember password, but it really makes the security of your account quite kind of weak. So it is better to have a strong password. There are ways that you can have a strong password while also ensuring that you can easily remember it. You can probably define a pattern for yourself, and this is a pattern that you do not share with others, so that others cannot figure out as to what your account password is. In general, I have also seen one problem frequently being faced in organizations is where people have a tendency to create a password, something like their organization's first name at 123, because it is far too easy to remember. But then when attackers try to take over your account, these are the first few passwords that they try anyway. Other than that, I've frequently seen that there are password lists that are released by well-known security organizations, which are basically a log of all of the poor passwords that people are using frequently. And the most common password being used is 123456. You should avoid having these kind of passwords. Other than that, obviously it is a logical thing that you should not share your password with anyone else, even if that individual belongs to your own organization, because you should be treating your password like your signature. So you do not share your signature with anyone. Similarly, you should not be sharing your passwords as well. And finally, if possible, you should attempt to get administrative rights disabled on your regular usage account. You should rather have another account created on your local machine which has got admin rights if you need that. But at an organization level, it is a preferable thing that normally admin rights are disabled by the IT team. And only if in case, let's say, something needs to be installed and administrative credentials are required, then people should be required to reach out to their IT admin department.
Okay, okay. So that was a good list of things to do. That is, avoid poor passwords, do not share your password with anyone, create strong passwords, and disable admin rights. Correct.
Right.
Now, is VPN useful? Is it recommended?
Usually nowadays VPN is, I would personally say that it is not really a necessary thing, because see, VPN comes into picture if in case you are doing one of two things. One is that you're doing something that creates a threat for you. For example, let's say you are a journalist, or you are someone who is disclosing government secrets for the sake of social cause, in which case you could potentially become a target. In that case, VPN is useful because it kind of helps in hiding your identity. Or otherwise, if you're doing something that is questionable, illegal in nature, in which case then you would want not to be able to be traced. But other than that, most of the work that we are doing right now is through cloud-based SaaS applications, and almost always you will find that these applications are SSL enabled, HTTPS protocol they use. And as long as you are sure that all of the transfer of information is happening through encrypted channel, you really do not need a VPN. VPN was an important thing when applications used to be on premise, but nowadays most applications are on the cloud. And since they are on the cloud, VPN adds a level of security. It kind of eliminates the possibility of a man in the middle attack, but SSL does the same job, right? So having said that, it does help to have a VPN, specifically speaking, if you are someone who frequently connects to public Wi-Fi networks, where, let's say, you are someone who travels frequently and you are constantly using the airport Wi-Fi or the railway station's Wi-Fi, or you are sitting in a cafe and working regularly where you connect to the cafe's Wi-Fi. In which case, yes, I strongly recommend that you have VPN, but otherwise, you really do not need it.
Okay, okay, great. So, what to look for when getting a VPN?
There are three main things that I would suggest when it comes to taking up a VPN. In case for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, if you do intend to use it, one of the things that you should look for is that there should be a no logs policy. The idea here specifically applies in case you are doing something that creates a threat to you. Because of the fact that since the whole idea of having a VPN is no one should be able to trace you. If, let's say, it is identified, and it is actually fairly easy to identify for people who would be interested in your identity. For them, it is easy to find you out if, let's say, logs are maintained and your original IP address from where you are connecting is something that is logged with your VPN provider. So if, let's say, your VPN provider has got a no logs policy, that means that once your communication is over, you have disconnected, there is no evidence left on the VPN provider side in their logs as to who it is who connected, right? In which case it would be you. This is something that I would say that you should be looking for. The second aspect that you should look for is to ensure that your VPN provider has got a lot of servers, because there are a whole lot of people who are connecting to these centralized servers of the VPN provider, and that is from where the outbound connections are being established. If there are very few servers, it is highly likely that the servers will get overloaded and your VPN connectivity speed will go down. So if there are more number of servers, it is highly possible that your speed will not get affected. And the final thing that does tend to have a severe impact on your connectivity speed if you're using a VPN provider is how far the server is located from your location. So for example, let's say you are using a VPN and you are based in India, whereas your server is located in let's say the UK. It would have to make a round trip from India to UK to your destination. This round trip increases the amount of time that it takes, and increased time automatically leads to increase in slowing down of your connectivity speed. So if the servers are located close by you, then your speed will be high, which is why you should be preferring to get a VPN service provider who has got servers which are located close to you.
Okay, okay. And what are the common ways in which remote working may compromise security of a company?
The one thing that I mentioned, which we already covered when we started off, is having poor account security, and poor account security starts with a poor password. That's one aspect. Second is that, let's say you have not enabled two-factor authentication, then it becomes far more easier to perform something called as a brute force attack, which means someone can identify. Third is providing excessive level of access, and this is specifically for the organization side, where because of the fact that maybe an access control policy has not been defined, or it is not clear as to what exactly is the level of access to be provided to individual employees. So that results in excessive access being provided, and the most common being administrative access provided to individual employees when you know for sure that they are not likely to require it. So that is one issue. The other one is again related to the first point which I mentioned, which is either the organization has not defined an access control policy as to who should be getting what kind of access and what level of access that needs to be provided, how the access needs to be provided. Maybe that is not defined at all, or even if it is defined, it has not been implemented the way it has been defined, which eventually leads to poor access control. The third and most important aspect that is actually become quite severe in the pandemic era, COVID-19 I'm referring to, is where employees have not been trained on information security policies. They are not aware of information security, and because of that, they tend to become victims of social engineering and phishing attacks, where someone is able to fool them into identifying potential attack, and then that leads to their account being compromised, which then leads to the attacker gaining access to the organization's resources through their account, right? And finally, again connected to the earlier ones that I mentioned, which is not disabling admin rights on the computer, not disabling USB ports, which are a common threat vector for viruses and malware to enter into the system. So these are the things that I would like to call out.
Okay, great. How would you suggest that file backup is taken while working remotely?
Okay. Uh, See, I have always recommended this. Backup should not be a manual activity. As much as possible, it should be automated. Because if you leave it to humans, there is a high probability that one of two things will happen. Either they will forget it, or they will ignore taking that action, even if they are reminded about it. Besides that, backups should be automated because of the fact that this is something that is only reliable as a disaster recovery mechanism if it is automated. If it is dependent on a human, then because of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, either your backups are likely to be old, or they are likely to not exist at all, right? Having said that, one important thing that I would want to call out here is an account sync is not the same as account backup. What is the difference between the two? One is, let's say you are using G Suite, and your entire drive account is synced to your computer. What happens in that scenario is that the moment you make any kind of a change on your local machine to any file, Google Backup and Sync will automatically sync it to your G Suite account. The issue with that approach is, and this is what I call as a sync, not a backup, is that if, let's say, there is an infection of your computer by a virus or a malware, all of those infected files automatically sync to your drive. So you cannot even go to your drive and fetch them, because what you will fetch from there are also infected files, right? So there is an important distinction to be made, that it is not a sync. Now, what does this mean? When you conduct a backup, every time that automated backup runs, it should create a snapshot of all of your files and keep it date tagged. And when the next backup runs, it should create a new set of files, which are a newer snapshot. But the old snapshot possibly remain. Let's say you keep the last 3 or 7 or 10 copies, right? So that in case your most recent backup is not usable, you can always go back to a previous version. The idea is that all of your files should have been copied at a time before something went wrong. and only those kind of backups are reliable. Now that is done through a backup software, not through syncing. So your OneDrive, your G Suite, Google Backup and Sync, or Google File Stream, these are not something that you should rely on, or Dropbox, Box.net. All of these are not reliable, right? Finally, as much as possible, even if you automate, you should set up reminders for checking one thing, which is your automated backups have succeeded. Because it may so happen that you will set up your automated backup and you will assume that the backups are being taken. But if you do not go back and check that the backups have succeeded, when disaster strikes, you will want to go back to your backups and then realize that in fact there was a fatal error that was causing the backups to fail, and your files not have never been backed up. And if that happens, then even your automation failed, right? So these are the things
Right.
that you should keep
Okay.
active.
Okay. Great. Moving to our next question, which operating system is the most secure according to you, Windows or Mac or Linux?
I would say that none. That is not the a question we should be wondering about. All operating systems are secure. Look at it this way: if anyone is creating an operating system, they are not creating an operating system that is likely to be insecure, right? But because they are the original equipment manufacturers, the OEM. So I'm referring to Microsoft or Apple, or when it comes to Linux, now there are so many flavors available. So let's assume Ubuntu, which is the most commonly used Linux flavor in cloud-based SaaS environment. So they have to come with default settings, and these default settings are the problem really when it comes to operating systems, right? So as soon as you receive your computer, or as soon as you set up your operating system, you should ensure that they are secure to a certain extent. And the most common when it comes to organizations is, what I suggest is, you should set up and define something like a server and operating system hardening policy, which means that as soon as you are commissioning a new machine, whether it is running on Windows or Mac or any flavor of the Linux, you should be running a certain steps that ensure that all of these default settings are sufficiently changed, so that your vulnerabilities have reduced, right? And you can actually go to CIS website. CIS stands for Center for Internet Security, and they have these benchmark scripts that you can run. They are available for all flavors and all possible operating systems that you can think of, where they give you a reference document that you can run these scripts on your operating system, and you can be sure that it has been hardened. Besides that, you can also run tests that they have been hardened sufficiently. See, having said that, I definitely would want to call out the fact that 90% of computers that are in use in the world are running Windows. And that is because Microsoft has been far more successful in selling their operating system. Given that, naturally, as an attacker, it makes sense that they put in the least amount of effort and gain the maximum benefit. And the way to do that is to create or target operating systems that are more prevalent, more used. And because it is Windows, naturally there are more attacks that are on Windows operating system, whether the attacks are in the form of vulnerabilities being exploited, or they could be in the form of viruses and malware being created, right? So this is how things uh, as far as operating system is concerned. On top of that, just having an operating system is definitely not enough. You should have antivirus and firewall installed. And specifically nowadays, with when it comes to Windows or Mac OS, you do not really need to worry about installing something altogether new, or an additional software. Although having commercial versions of the software is far more useful, because they are typically much more stronger in whatever it is their primary role that they are supposed to play. But Windows has got Defender. It's a very good software at this point in time. It used to be not as powerful, but I strongly believe that now it is good enough. Windows has got an inbuilt firewall, which we should be enabling. Similar is the case with Mac OS, where you should be enabling the inbuilt firewall that is there. Other than that, you should probably be enabling the disk encryption, because this is something that matters in case you end up losing your mobile device. And when I say mobile device, even a laptop is a mobile device. On top of all of this, let's say you have taken all of these actions, yet if you follow bad practices, like, let's say going out to websites that are questionable, let's say Google Chrome you're using, and it is already suggesting that the potential website that you're visiting could be infected, and you still wish to proceed, in effect you are undertaking risky behavior, right? So you should be aware as to what is it that you're doing, and take actions in those on those lines. If you are context aware, I think you'll be fine.
Okay. Great, great. That was a very good explanation. I guess there's no one good OS, right? Shailendra, just
Yeah.
one request. I think the movement is causing your audio to fluctuate. If you could,
Okay.
yeah, I think this level is fine. If you could just
Okay.
maintain that position. Okay.
Okay.
Now, moving to our next question. Which security policies should be considered mandatory and non-negotiable?
Okay. So when we say non-negotiable, in fact, every policy is negotiable. But I would rather say that having a good set of policy, or the minimum set of policies. Let's focus on that word, right? Mandatory and minimum. There are four policies that come to my mind specifically. One is there should be an information security policy. Another is acceptable usage policy, which specifies that how people in belonging to an organization, they're supposed to be using the devices, the resources, the systems that have been given to them. um, in effect, you are basically telling people through this policy that these are your boundaries and you should not be crossing these boundaries. So, to give you an example, let's say you will not visit any websites that could cause any kind of infection. You would not visit any website that contains content that is explicitly illegal, things like those. Then the next policy that I would rather say an organization should focus on is having a bring your own device policy, because in today's cloud-based environment, um, people are permitted to access systems and applications that belong to an organization from their own mobile device. And see, when I say mobile device in information security, a laptop as well as a handset, a mobile, both of them are considered mobile device, because the focus is not on the noun mobile, but rather, the what mobile means, which is that, something you can carry around, and a laptop is something you can carry around as well. When I say bring your own device policy, or commonly as it is called the BYOD policy, I'm specifically referring to mobile devices, because those are usually employee owned, and an organization has got limited control over what kind of security can be implemented. Besides that, these run on operating systems for which security technologies have not evolved. So, for example, there are standardized technologies that you can implement on a laptop, like your antivirus, anti-malware, uh, data leakage prevention systems. There are so many security technologies that have matured over the last 20 years. For mobile OSs, which is Android and iOS, there are not many of them, right? So because of this, it becomes much more complicated for the IT teams to have control what they need to secure the data that is flowing from the organization's environment to their devices, right? Having said that, this is where the BYOD comes into picture, that you can possibly set up something like a Google MDM, or in case you are using G Suite, or in case you're using Office 365, even it has got a mobile device management policy, which gives you a lot of control. And this is what should be defined in your BYOD policy. And then finally, one of the most common things that I've seen organizations facing trouble with is, in case disaster strikes, the disaster could be in many ways. It could be either a cyber attack has succeeded, or it could be simply things like floods, or a major downtime that has been caused because of, let's say, political unrest, which is something that is fairly common, right? What tends to happen is that in such cases, there is no backup. So your backup and data retention policy is something that is critical. So to summarize these four: information security policy, which is at the top of your entire ISMS, which is information security management system; acceptable usage policy; bring your own device policy; and backup and data retention policy. These are the four I strongly recommend. Although if you look at a standard such as ISO 27001, there are a list of 41 of them that are mandatory. Meaning, if let's say as an organization you're going for a certification like ISO 27001, then you need to have 41 policies, right? But let's say you are an organization who is not intending to obtain any of the certification, then these four are must.
Okay, awesome. Yes, out of the 41, four at least should be
Four,
implemented. Yes,
yes.
yes, that's good. Good to know. Um, Next is, on more on a practical level. So, what are some obvious cybersecurity mistakes which a lot of companies make while working remotely? I think a very, on the ground, what mistakes are we all making probably?
Right. So, first and foremost, not having an access control policy, right? Because when you have not even defined what is it that you wish to provide, what level of access you wish to provide to the various levels of people in your organization. Obviously, an organization is made up of levels of people. They are doing different things. They belong to different functions, departments, the kind of jobs that they are doing. Depending on all of these factors, the level of access that they require is different. It has to be different, because what should be the perspective here is to provide the level of access that is necessary for people to perform their job role, and nothing more than that. So I have frequently seen this, specifically in case of newer organizations, that the easy way out is on the laptops. You end up providing administrative rights to everyone. There is no harm per se in giving that out. See, here the question is not about not trusting your people. This is not about trust. The issue here is, if let's say that someone from your customer support team, for example, who's not professionally mature, who's relatively new to the world of working itself, forget about cybersecurity, they are more likely to become an easier target for an attacker. They could be exploited much more easily. And combine that with the fact that they would have administrative rights on their computer, this attacker will be easily able to gain their access to their system, and that is from where they take the next step to gain access to your system. Besides that, is administrative right really required for someone working in your customer support team? Because most likely you will already install all of the applications that are required to be given, and then hand over the machine to them, right? In case they do require something that comes up later, it's not so difficult to provide any kind of remote access, remote control setup, where you end up setting up whatever is the software that is required. So excessive rights is one. The second thing, which is, first thing is access control policy. The second one is excessive rights, admin rights. Also, I spoke about. Third, I have seen most common mistake that is done is that USB being enabled, right? USBs are a very common threat vector when it comes to people, or rather when it comes to viruses and malware that infect computers. That they are the most common threat vector, like the route through which these harmful agents they enter the computer. Ideally speaking, you should be disabling them. Maybe you can enable them for the sake of permitting people to charge their devices, like their phone, for example. And there is a way to do that it will allow charging but will not allow data transfer. And when you block data transfer, automatically viruses and malware, they cannot infect the machine, right? So this
Right.
is one. And then finally, please do have some kind of an information security training provided to your all of your employees, at the minimum, on how phishing attacks work, right? So you should ensure that these are the steps that you should take care of.
Yeah, so I mean, given that how many so easily with it's possible to sort of use the USB cable, right, and to infect malware, right? So yes, we have to be so careful about that. Okay. Next question is it worth using a password manager?
Not necessary, in my opinion, because all browsers tend to have a password manager inbuilt in them, which is controlled by your operating system's password. That is a good enough security, in my opinion. And
Okay.
these password managers that are inbuilt have been designed with security in mind. So as long as you do not follow bad practices when it comes to passwords, like the ones that I mentioned earlier, I do not think that this is a problem to begin with. But having said that, having a password manager does help, because the fact that they can increase the what is called as an entropy of a password, the complexity, the length. They can increase it much more easily because they are, after all a computer system. And because of the fact that they can increase the entropy, your accounts tend to become more secure. But having said that, no, I do not believe that password managers are really necessary.
Okay. Okay. Is a password okay, that comes related to passwords. How to allow multiple users to access the same account?
Uh, okay, so I believe that you are. This is a very common problem and something that is discouraged frequently by information security professionals, that every individual should be given one account. The reason being that if something goes wrong, you want to be able to backtrace your steps and conduct a decent investigation to find out where the compromise happened. If, let's say, it is the same account that is being used by multiple people, it becomes much more difficult. But due to cost reasons, due to practical reasons, it may be possible that you want to share accounts, in which case what I would suggest is that typically, mm, you can enable something like two-factor authentication and have that control of the two-factor authentication with a single individual who is, let's say, your IT administrator. Because once a particular machine has been authenticated, after that you can keep the authentication enabled for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days as the application permits, right? What this does is that it brings in the benefit of some amount of security, while at the same time it achieves your goal of sharing passwords. Although I definitely would want to close this question with the fact that, as much as possible, please avoid this. Create individual accounts, hand it over to individual employees.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Shailendra, thank you for
So,
all the
Janvi,
Yes,
I
I
see that
have
there
a
is a
question.
question.
Yes,
There is
yes.
a
I have
question
a
that has been
question.
raised.
Yes, let me pick that up. There are a
Yeah.
couple of questions from startup Sanatana.
Yeah.
There are two questions they ask. One is any gadgets, tools specific to small startups from a security point of view?
So this is kind of a closed ended question, rather, and the issue is that the scope is actually quite wide. So let us split that up into two parts. One is gadgets and tools that possibly, for example, will help organizations secure on the organization side, like something that is in control of the IT team, IT department. And then the other aspect would be, what is it that would be installed or implemented on the employee side, right? So when it comes to IT teams, see, my experience has been that it is not necessary that we try to find anything new and latest when it comes to implementing. If you happen to just read up some of the standards like ISO 27001 or PCI DSS or SOC 2, almost all of them prescribe a certain minimum set of security technologies that should be implemented. And what are these security technologies? Ensuring that antivirus is implemented, ensuring that antivirus is not possible to be controlled uh, by the end user, ensuring that the security patches uh, have been automated to the extent that as soon as new patches are released for antivirus, they are automatically applied on the user side, ensuring that users cannot disable these automatic updates. If we ensure that this is done as far as the IT department is concerned, I think to a large extent, a whole lot of issues related to cyber attacks will not succeed. The second thing that the standards talk about is firewalls, and there are two kinds of firewalls that you can implement. One is a firewall that is on the end user machine, which is what I spoke about earlier, which is Windows firewall, or the firewall that is inbuilt in the iOS. Similarly, you can find good alternatives for Linux as well. You should enable them, and it should not be possible for the end user to disable them, no matter how much they complain about slow performance of the machine. Because usually these kind of software, if they're running well, and the laptop or the machine has been maintained well, it is not likely that these software will end up causing a lot of performance issues. On the org side, in the COVID-19 scenario, anyways, everyone is working from home. But whenever it is that we all return to our offices, a gateway level firewall is a must, right? So these are two things that I would want all organizations to focus on. When it comes to VPC, your virtual private cloud, where your cloud hosted application is there, almost the same set of aspects apply, but there are some additional security technologies that you would want to implement. So let's say you would want to have a load balancer setup so that your downtime issues are reduced. You may want to have some kind of a web application firewall that is set up, and please note that web application firewall is different from firewall that we talk about in the network sense. Therefore, there is a network firewall and there is a web application firewall, and these are two different things altogether. Then I mentioned about load balancer. In addition to that, you may want to segregate your network into subnets, so that let's say one of your subnets has is public facing and it has gotten infected. It will be highly unlikely that any malware that has infected that subnet flows to the other subnets, right? And isolation will help. So again, to answer in short, focus on the basics and ensure that the basics are done well. The more security technologies that you implement, the more complex your IT environment becomes. And once it becomes complicated, you end up ignoring the alerts these security technologies are raising, because they become overwhelming. The volume of alerts that are coming from so many security technologies become very high. And once you start ignoring them, automatically uh, your security level, your security posture has gone down. Focus on the basics, ensure that they are implemented well, ensure that they are monitored frequently, and that's it. That will take care of
So how much,
95% of your.
do you think monetarily should be allocated from a budget perspective for
It's
these
it,
minimum basic things for a startup or for a small organization?
so see, this is what is my recommendation when it comes to that. Security is definitely a time-consuming, very laborious, and sufficiently costly activity, right? And when you're talking of cost, you're not referring of money alone. So when you talk of budget, it's not only about how much you are spending in hard cash. It is also about how much time of your people is going to be spent on security. How much effort are people going to be putting in? This is effort taken away from their core work, right? So let's say there is a system administrator who is managing your VPC. Now they are supposed to take up security related changes. Naturally, that is time that they are not spending on VPC management, right? When you account for all of this is what I strongly recommend. There are a lot of helpful articles that you can easily find. Let's say you run a search on basics of security for a startup. Just run a search for it. Follow whatever is written in there. See, your objective is not to reach high levels of security. Your objective is to reach adequate level of security in the beginning, right? And when I say adequate, you should ensure that your system should not be possible to be infected by malware or viruses. It should not be possible for phishing attacks to succeed. It should not be possible that your VPC can be taken over easily. These are very basics, and if you implement all of the
Right,
things that I
but
have
what
spoken
sort
upon
of a
earlier.
ballpark figure, annually should somebody, budget to spend? Is it 10 lakhs? Is it 5 lakhs? Or would it be in that range
Okay,
or
so
more than that?
if you do insist on a value, I would say that let's not put it
For an
in
Indian startup, let's say,
yeah, so
Indian.
let us not put it in a specific value. Let's put it in this manner that in the beginning phases, ideally you should be spending about 5% of your annual budget on security. It's a very rough cut estimate.
Annual
Yes,
spend
this value,
overall.
yes, this value will vary wildly, because as the organization scales
Okay.
become bigger, the percentage becomes far smaller.
Okay. Oh, okay. As you grow, it becomes smaller. Okay, because
Yes,
the volume will obviously increase. Okay.
and once you have implemented things, then you do not need to spend anymore.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Shailendra, for joining as our expert here today and answering all those questions. And viewers, thank you for joining this webinar. We'll be hosting another webinar soon on a different topic. So Please, watch out, log into our LinkedIn page and our Neumetric.com. You can see the ticker below. So you know more about what's happening in the cyber world through us. All right. Thank you, Shalana. Thank you once again for joining.
Thank you, Janvi. Thank you for having me.
Bye. Good day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.